Guessing. Hey, I'm glad you're here. One of the things that I love to relish in this day and age, some of you are going to differ on this opinion, but I love where we're at as a culture and technology. I understand there's a lot of things out there that technology is getting harder to control and there's some dangers out there. But if you stop and think about what we have access to in our world today, if your kids live halfway across the country, you can actually see them face to face, not just talk to them. You can talk to people around the world. Things can go viral and spread the globe in just a matter of minutes. It's amazing what we have in our power today. Now, with that, I'm going to be very honest. I would think one of the greatest things about the interweb is that we should be able to learn from each other, right? We should really be able to. And men, I'm going to pick on us for just a second because I think for some reason, men, we should really get better at learning from each other and our mistakes. And I don't know that we always do that. Like we know scientifically, we have proven in our world today that women live longer than men. Now, guys, we need to be figuring that out. I'm a little disconcerted about that. I have a little bit of trouble. I'm trying to figure out, I want to live as long as my wife. And apparently it's not genetics. It's not diet. It's not all of this other stuff. Apparently, and I have found proof, we apparently have some issues that we don't deal with. Let me show you some pictures that prove why men struggle with living longer. This first one, this looks like just a simple paint job. I don't see a problem here, but my wife says this is why you're not going to live as long as me. Because you don't see a problem here. Show me the next one. This is great. I see this as a man who has solved a problem. Okay, you don't have a tree trimmer, so you just hook up the riding lawnmower, right? My wife says no. Let me show you this next one. Now I have done this. Okay, it's moving day. You got to get a couch from upstairs to downstairs. Just drop it over the side. It's the shortest distance, right? It makes sense to me. How about this next one? Now these guys, they're way ahead of their time. They have found a way to grill hot dogs in the pool, okay? I'm thinking these guys are going to be viral by next week. This is going viral. They're showing a little respect for that outlet, I think. Give me the last one. Here's a man just making a living. Making a living. I mean, okay, so it's not OSHA-approved scaffolding, but still, it seems like it would work. You can put those down. I know that when I showed you those pictures, I know a couple of things happened. One, part of this room just broke out in a cold sweat, right? Like the idea of taking that kind of risk, taking that kind of dangerous activity and putting it in your life just makes you want to break out in a cold sweat. I know there are two kinds of people in here, right? It has nothing to do with gender. Some of you mitigate risk. Like it's just, you're all about not letting risk and danger come into your life like that because you don't want to shorten your lifespan. Some of us, and guys, I get it, it's a lot of us, we look at those things and we just think there's a good challenge, right? Like it just makes sense to us. We kind of invite danger in. We kind of think that it's something to be embraced. I don't know what the most dangerous thing is you've ever done. I can tell you as a kid, now my mom's in the room and I don't know if she'd ever heard this story. As a kid, we used to get on our bicycles, right? Go down a hill and stand up on the seat and put our arms out, right? Like I have this image in my head, and today I think that's probably a little risky. And the couple of concussions I had as a kid were probably a result of things like that. But I don't know whatever you did as a child, as an adult, where you risked some dangerous activity in your life. I don't know how bad it was, but I want you to stop and think for a second. Why do you risk dangerous activities? Why do you take a risk like that? The bottom line is, you know what happens oftentimes? We'll take a risk when there is some kind of perceived reward at hand. We'll take a risk if there's some kind of perceived reward that we're going to get back from that risk. We'll risk dangerous behaviors for a reward, especially in our personal lives or maybe even our professional lives, maybe in our relational lives. We will go out on a limb, we'll take a risk that sometimes we wouldn't normally take. But I want to camp out on something for just a few minutes this morning because there's an area for most of us that will not take a risk in. There's an area that I've just seen it over and over, and I see it in my life where, to be honest, I don't risk any kind of dangerous activity. Where I find myself almost timid at times in playing it safe, and it's this area, it's in my relationship with God. So many times I'm willing to take a risk in other areas of my life, but not my relationship with God. In fact, I'm not even sure what it looks like. So many times when I talk to God, it's all about how can you help me, right? How can you take care of me more? How can you bless me? How can you provide for me? How can you make sure that I have what I need? That seems to be my mindset with God so many times. And there is no risk or danger in that, right? I'm safe and I'm cautious in my relationship with God. I want to spend a few minutes in Psalm 139 this morning. We're going to hit the bulk of it, not cover all of it. So if you've got your flyer, if you've got your Bible, or if you just want to look it up on your phone or your mobile device, pull up the scriptures. Always keep them in front of you, right? Double check what I'm telling you. Double check. Some of you do, and you call me out on it. It's great. Usually it's because I've messed up the references severely. Psalm 139. If you don't know much about the Psalms, here's what you need to know. The book of Psalms is a collection of things like poetry and songs. This book was written by several different people, and it was collected over the years, and it was put together for the Old Testament nation of Israel to worship God. This would have been their hymnal back in the day, right? This is the stuff they used when they would sing songs. These are the words they would sing. When they would recite things together, these are the words they would recite as they reflected on God. Now, Psalm 139 was written by King David. It was written just about the time he became king. And the thing we knew about Psalm 139 and the thing we know about David is this, that David was never really the guy we thought was going to be king. In fact, when the prophet Samuel goes to David's house and because God told him to go there, and he starts looking at the brothers to figure out who God has appointed to be king next, David is out in the field taking care of some sheep. He's just a shepherd boy at the time. And the prophet goes through all of the sons, and the father's scratching his head, and I'm sure the brothers are thinking, well, I'm the next logical choice. And when God tells the prophet, no, there's somebody else, and it turns out to be David, they're just all kind of amazed. Like would God really pick this young shepherd boy, this young buck that's just out in the field just doing, menial tasks and taking care of the family's flocks? But that's who God chose. He wasn't groomed for king. He really wasn't raised in the proper channels. He didn't grow up in a palace. But he grew up knowing God. And God said, that's my man. That's who I want in here next. Eventually, if you know enough about David, you know he had a battlefield encounter with a giant, and that turned out well for him, and God was with him in that situation. And so eventually he becomes the armor bearer for Saul, who is currently the king. And as happens even in our culture, rulers don't always like the incoming people. And Saul and David kind of go at it a little bit. And Saul really starts pursuing David and threatens his life. And David begins to be not just afraid, but he's on the run a lot. And he starts to pay attention to not just how Saul is treating him, but how Saul is allowing the enemies of God to kind of push in on the nation. So when he writes Psalm 139, he's becoming king, and Psalm 139 gets classified in an imprecatory psalm. That's a fancy word for saying David writes a psalm as he's becoming king that basically is his commitment to God, and he says, let's destroy the enemies. Now watch what he does, because the verbiage here is probably, we're going to go down to verse 19 first, it's probably even a little offensive when you first start reading it. Follow with me. Talking to God, he says, oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. Now, this prayer, I think, seems risky. I think this prayer seems dangerous. I think when we first read a prayer like this, it kind of makes sense that this is kind of a risky, dangerous prayer. David's coming into office, and he's just kind of drawing a line in the sand. He says, look, I'm for God, and if you're not for God, then you're against me, and you're against God, and we're going to go to battle. And in fact, he's leaning on this prayer so much, he's like, God, help me just to squash them. Help me to this is a bold prayer. It's a dangerous prayer. It means he's probably, if he's bold enough to pray this, he's probably bold enough to go out and take action on these things. So this is the heart of David. This man of God has this attitude against the people who are against God. Now, before you get any ideas and start praying imprecatory psalms this week to all of your enemies, let's talk about what is going on here. In the Old Testament, God was revealing himself to the world. Right? God is, after the fall in the garden, God begins to unfold a plan to restore mankind, to bring us back in relationship with him. So remember, the nation of Israel is a vessel. They're the people of God that God is using to bring about the revelation of God on this earth. And eventually, from that line of people, will come the Messiah. That's what's happening. So if you are a foreign nation, right, it's not that you're just a different skin color. These nations, when they would rise up against Israel, they were rising up against God himself. So it was the nation of God against the world, in a sense, as God was bringing about revelation of himself to the whole world. As he did that, he started to teach the Old Testament nation of Israel how to rule. He started to teach them how to have scales and checks and balances, and he started to teach them something we would term talionic justice. He started to teach them how to issue judgments that equaled the crime. We would use the phrase eye for an eye. He started to teach them how to have a system of law and order in a culture so that cultures wouldn't just run crazy off. God is revealing himself. So when David writes this, it's not meant to be this personal jab at an individual as much as it is a declaration of the kingdom of God in the battle that's going on against the kingdom of the pagan world, against Satan. This is what's occurring at the time. When Jesus showed up, he fulfilled the law. See, most of us tend to think that the idea of like talionic justice, eye for an eye, has kind of been done away with because of Jesus. Right? He came the Son of God, became man, walked this earth, sinless and perfect, paid a price on the cross, a sacrifice for us, and then walked out of the grave. And now all of that's gone away, but that's not completely true. What happened was he paid the price for our sin. He became our eye for an eye. Jesus took away that judgment for those who have faith in him, and that's changed. But it's not that talionic justice, the law didn't go away. Jesus fulfilled the law for those who will hold on to him. That's the difference. And when we look at this, so many times we'll jump to conclusions and we'll just think, well, look, David jabs at his enemies and he says these things, and we don't understand what's going on at the time. Now, when Jesus paid the price for us, he then turned around and here's what he said to us. I have a new commandment. I have a new law. And really it's the encapsulation of all of the law. He said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to love God, and I want you to love others. And I want you to include in those others your enemies. So he extended grace, not just to us, he actually extends grace to the people in the world that oftentimes we think don't deserve it, and he does it through us. And I want you to see what happens here, because you read this, what David says, you think, man, that's a dangerous prayer. And sometimes it gets us worked up, right? Like if I'm David and I'm taking over as king, I'm going to give a speech to my people, and I want it to end like this. Like, help us squash your enemies, God. Like, that just sounds like a rousing kind of a speech to give to a nation. David doesn't stop there. David doesn't stop with just the smackdown portion of the conversation. Which, by the way, let's be really honest with each other. Most of us, that's the part of the prayer we like to pray, right? You get in traffic this week and tell me that you don't pray a prayer like this, okay? You get your tax notice, right? And don't tell me that you don't start praying a prayer for some of our politicians, right? You listen, let's get real personal. You let somebody come into your community and start building a place of worship that's not for God, and tell me what starts to rise up in you. You start getting sucked into conversations about racism, and tell me what starts to come up in you. It's not always bad. Listen, we're supposed to stand up for the people who cannot stand up for themselves. But the problem is, what happens when we start with this kind of prayer, this imprecatory, this prayer that calls judgment and curses down upon people? See, there's kind of two ends of this spectrum right here. And it's easy to say over here, oh, here's David. He's the man of God. He's not really hating on people. He's hating the sin, right? And that's kind of how we paint it. And we kind of clean it up a little bit. But the problem is the people were the ones doing the sin. The people were the ones driving the hate. And it's hard to separate that, right? And so sometimes the other end of the spectrum is we'll look at a psalm like this and we'll think, oh, well, I can pray the same prayer, right? Because after all, David prayed that kind of prayer, rain down judgment on people, God. And we'll just pray it. But I want you to see something. Because David did not stop with these two verses. As much as I think, again, he's becoming king, he's new, maybe we should just give him this. I think he should stop right here. I think you pray this prayer out loud, you sing this song, you get this in front of people, you get them all worked up. Right now the nation's behind you. We're going to battle, we're going to war, we're going to take care of our enemies. But David doesn't stop this song there. In fact, he makes it what I think is the most dangerous prayer of all. Go to verse 23. He goes straight from squash them, God, to verse 23. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. See if there's any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. See, I think that's the dangerous prayer. I think it's easy to pray judgment. I think it's easy to pray that God's will be done. In our hearts and our minds, we believe that His will is always going to be best for us. Now, we believe that about us. We're not sure about other people, right? We cling to things that tend to make life good for us. And David is the leader. He's making a statement. He's declaring that God is God, and they're going to serve God, and they're going to stand in the face of a culture that's trying to push against them. But he doesn't leave them there. He doesn't leave them with this, hey, zap them kind of mentality. He says, search me. See, instead of focusing on his enemies, he starts to turn everything to the inner me. He starts to go inward. And he submits himself to God, and he starts to say, search me, God. Check my heart out. Like I've made this really bold statement, but at the end of the day, God, you are God. Now you search me. Write this down. Dangerous prayers begin with when we deal with our dangerous position. Dangerous prayers will begin when we begin to deal with our dangerous position. Let me tell you why. A couple of months back, we had a whole conversation about little lies that we will believe. And one that we've talked around a lot is this thing in our culture that says, follow your heart. Follow your heart. Like everything's just going to be okay if you just follow your heart. It's common belief in our culture that people are basically good, and all we have to do is everybody follow your heart and it's going to work out. That's what we believe. That's what we're taught. That is the thing that has become intuitive in our culture, not the other way around. And the problem with that is we know, first of all, let's be honest. Anybody have a bad thought on the highway last week in Dallas traffic? Don't raise your hands. I get it. I'm baiting you. Listen, brutal honesty. How is it that we really believe that we can follow our hearts when such simple things like driving from point A to point B cause our hearts to think scenes of apocalyptic death? And in mine too, trust me. Right? That's step one. Step two, though, is God speaking to us. He uses another one of his prophets, Jeremiah, in the Old Testament, and to put it up on the screen, Jeremiah 17:9, he says, Jeremiah from God says, look, man, your heart is messed up. Like, it's wicked. It's sick. It's so messed up that you don't even know how to understand it. It's so bad, you're going to be deceived by yourself. And in fact, verse 10, I, the Lord, I'm the only one who can search that heart and test that mind. We don't like that. But that's why they call them blind spots, right? They're blind spots because we're blind to them so many times. We're blind to this idea that our hearts can be that bad. David's trying to speak against things that keep us from flourishing with God. That's what he's trying to speak against. That's why he's declaring this stance for the nation of Israel, because the redemption history of God is working through that nation. David understands a piece of what God is doing. And he makes this statement. He understands that there are things in our world that keep us from flourishing. Listen, no shame, no guilt. But everybody in here today, if you haven't experienced a broken marriage, you've been close to somebody who has. Right? There is nothing in me that says the things that lead to a broken marriage actually make your life better. Now, the grace of God can help you recover, right? And that's the greatest thing about walking with God. But the simple fact of the matter is, there's nothing about the things that lead to a broken marriage that we'd all sit around and go, we're going to pray for this to happen, right? It's a busted up world. There are things that keep us from flourishing with God. And David is saying, those things we want to stand against. We want to intercede against those. We want to speak against those. We want people to flourish. But the real danger, for me, is that we get stuck in that circle. That we would stay where David is with this kind of imprecatory type attitude. Do you know people like that? Do you know people who say they follow Jesus but they never smile? Like, I would say that sometimes that's how you recognize some of us who get stuck. That life has just lost its joy. I went to sad to say, I was telling somebody before the service this morning, I went at a grocery shop this week. And I just hate to say it, but my salvation just about, that's another place. So it's the highway for me and the grocery store now, apparently is one of my struggling points. Where you get in line and you just feel like you're not getting service. My heart is bent. I'm naturally bent to things that will pull me away from the flourishing that God wants in my life. David doesn't stay in that circle. Verse 23, search me. Search me. Can I tell you something that you may not like? Can I tell you something that, in fact, the people around your neighbors, the culture around you, will not like? Nobody's going to deceive you more than you will deceive yourself. That's how wicked your heart is. Nobody's going to deceive you more than you deceive yourself. Nobody's going to believe your lies more than you'll believe them, more than you'll conjure up some kind of justification for a sin or for a thought or for an action. Listen, my reasoning gets going really well. When I'm in line and I think the cashier's not working as fast as they could, I've got all kinds of systems that I'm about to rain down on this place, man. I'm going to reorganize the whole store. Right? And I have a reasoning inside of me apart from that person that thinks I'm justified. Because that's how evil my heart can be. None of us are exempt from that. We're naturally born with hearts that will deceive us. And so here's our default mode. You ever notice this? That when other people sin, like it's so easy to see. Like you can identify that just straight up. When other people sin, what happens? We call for an immediate jury. Like we need a trial by jury. This person, and look, you know what it is? We do this really Christian thing. It's some of us who've been around the church a long time, we just want to help them get better. So we need to put them on trial right now. We gotta try them right now. Somebody sins, and what do we start doing? We start issuing judgment, right? We call in, we start acting like a prosecutor, right? We call in, we got to take care of this right now, and it's for their betterment. Yeah, we're trying to help them. Now, what happens when you sin? What happens when I sin? I'm no longer a prosecutor. All of a sudden, the grace of Jesus is good, right? All of a sudden, the love of God just covers everything I've done wrong, right? We turn into like a defense attorney in that moment, right? And you know this is true. At the grocery store, I get in line. I start checking items. I'm in the 20 item or less line. Make sure everybody's got under 20 items. Anybody in that line doesn't have under 20 items, I'm a prosecutor. If I have 22 items, you know what I am? A really good defense attorney. Because, 2 loaves of bread counts. It's just one item. Come on, it's one item, really. It's not 2. Think about it. Our minds, our hearts will deceive us. A dangerous prayer is not, God, get them. A dangerous prayer is not, God, rain down justice. A dangerous prayer is one that surrenders to God and says, search me. Like, I know something's got to be done out there, God. I know there's all these social ills. I know there's things that have got to be taken care of. I know I need to stand up and fill in the gap for people in our community that don't have enough. This afternoon, we're going to drive that load of school supplies over to Garland, to a sister church of ours out there, so that they can help kids who don't have enough. We want to stand in the gap every chance we get. We want to stand in the gap and help people, right? But we got to make sure that our heart is good as well. Because that's where a dangerous prayer is going to come from. How do you get there? I want to spend the last couple of minutes and go back to the very first, okay? And I'm going to do this pretty quickly, but I want to go back to the first of this little song. Because David sets us up for how he got there. How did he get to that place? Verse 1, "O Lord, you searched me and known me." He immediately starts with this position of surrender. Again, not a great word in our culture, right? We don't like it. This generation hasn't known war like previous generations, but the international symbol for surrender is what? Put your hands up in the air, right? Right? Get your hands up so I can tell you're not a threat. I give up. I surrender. David starts with this place. I give up. I'm not perfect. I don't have it figured out. You're God. You're God. You've searched me and you've known me. Verse 2, you know when I sit down. You know when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. If you're taking notes, write this word out in the margin. It's a big word. Write this word, omnipresence. This is the second time you've heard me use this series of words this year, because I think it's that important that we learn the character of God. David says, you know when I sit down, and you know when I rise up. You're everywhere. That's what that word means. You're omnipresent. You're everywhere. Like, I'm surrendering to this thing because I get it. You're everywhere. Like even in the hard places of my life. David doesn't say you're everywhere except when I need you most. You're everywhere except when I walk away from you. You're everywhere except when I'm committing some giant sin. He says, you're everywhere. He can't get away from them. When God is there when you are at your best. He's there when you're at your absolute worst. And David starts this dangerous prayer. It comes from this truth right here, discovering what? Watch this, that God is with us. Dangerous prayers will start to flow out of us. We'll start to be able to verbalize some things differently when we really discover that God is with us, that He knows everything. He knew what we did. See, then shame gets to let go of us at that point. We don't have to let shame embrace us. He keeps going. You search out my path and my lying down and my lying down and are acquainted with all of my days. He's omniscient. David says, you know everything. You know everything that there is to know about me. And if God knows everything about you, listen, if He knows everything about you, you know what He knows? He knows why you did what you did. You can fool the people around you, right? You can fool some of the people some of the time. You can't fool all the people all the time. That may or may not be true these days. But listen, you know God, when He looks at you, you can't fool Him at all. He knows why you did it. He knows the intentions of our heart. David has come to this understanding of this holy God, and so his dangerous prayers come out of this that he understands God is for us. God's with us, and God is for us. He knows why, and He's still there. He's not going to let you go. This is such a freeing reality. This is such a freeing truth. But most of us will live our lives, and if we don't come close to this understanding of God, then we're going to wonder why we struggle so much, especially internally. Keep going, verse 4. Even before word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. His omnipotence. He's all powerful. Listen, the image I get here with this hemming in, I love that verse. You have somebody in your life, a parent, a spouse, a dear friend, somebody that when life is just falling apart, they can walk up and they can put their arms around you and they can just kind of pull you in kind of tight. In that moment, everything just kind of settles down. In that moment, there's a sense of peace that kind of comes over you in that moment. David says, that's what I've surrendered to in God. That's what I've discovered. That He's that kind of God. That I can begin to pray dangerous prayers because I've discovered God is forgives us. That He's forgiven me. That He can put His arms around me and He has the power to take care of my sin. He has the power to handle anything that's a mess in my life. When he hems David in, that's what he's saying. He's saying He's got this ability, no matter where I've been, what I've done, what my attitudes have been, that He's going to be there with me and He's going to put His arms around me and He's going to take care of the issue. He can do that. He has that power. This is the understanding David is coming to. And watch this, verse 6, because this is an amazing little cap to this intro section. He says, such knowledge is just too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. Question. In your week, did you have a moment this week where you could stop, think about God, and think, He's so great, I almost can't handle it? Or did you have a moment like I did this week where I stopped and I just think, where is God in the middle of this total chaos? The culture is just dying, right? Like this store is not going to make it. They should be losing profits, and I'm going to write a letter to somebody, right? Yeah, again, brutal honesty. That's sometimes where I live. I get fixated in those moments where I feel like I need to rain down some kind of judgment upon the situation. And sometimes if we read the scriptures, we get to these imprecatory psalms and we think, well, see, David did it, so we're going to do it. We're going to stand up. We're going to rain down judgment. We're going to stand for God. Listen, David prays it, but he doesn't stay there. It's 2 verses in a whole song. And it starts and ends with who God is. Dangerous prayers begin when we deal with our dangerous position. The fact that our hearts can deceive us. That God's always with us, God's for us, and He has forgiven us. When we encounter that, you know what's going to happen? Your prayers are going to change. They'll get more dangerous. You'll be more willing to sit and let God search you. That's the challenge for the week. That's what I want to leave you with. That's where I want you to be this week, Journey. That we would take up the challenge and start to ask ourselves, what would it really look like to pray to God this week, every day? God, search me. And I don't care if you do it when you're driving in your car. If that's kind of, you got an hour commute, I get it. But here's what I want to challenge you with. Pray that prayer this week. Pray it every day or as often as you remember it. And pray it in a space where you can sit still for just a second. Don't pray it like you're throwing up some words to God and then running off. Pray it and sit. I was praying it again this morning on the way to church, and I'm becoming so convicted of the places in my life where I allow judgment to creep in. I'm an analytical person, right? If you talk to my wife, you can talk to my parents, they're going to tell you that I'm the guy who asks too many questions sometimes. And sometimes I think those questions are good, like, oh, well, I'm just asking questions. But you know what? A lot of times my questions are for a point. If I'm honest, I'm asking questions to try to get the last word in. I'm asking questions to try to gain the upper hand. I'm asking questions to prove somebody wrong. It's a form of judgment. Search me, God. You want to make an impact in the world? You want to expand your influence for Christ? You want to go further with God in this life? Don't worry about trying to rain down judgment on people or pointing out the evils of society. Ask God to search your heart this week and then get up and do what He says to do. We'll stand in the gap that way. We'll be different. People are going to ask us questions when we do that. Search me, O God. Pray that prayer with me this week. Let's pray together.